This unit is on the French Revolution. Now, the French have lots of revolutions. This was their biggest one. It was between 1789 and 1799. France underwent a violent revolution that overthrew the French monarchy, the king, established a republic where people get to vote, and a constitution. There was a period of terror and lots of executions, and it ended with the military coup d'etat when Napoleon took over the state. The revolution is considered to be one of the most controversial and significant events in the modern era. It brought to life in Europe the Enlightenment ideals of equality, freedom, and democracy, which would provide the basis for reform movements and new political philosophies in the 19th century. So let's begin. Absolutism. Absolute monarchs didn't share power with the people. They didn't listen to a constitution. They didn't care about voting. They thought what they said was as good as God's word. And you don't argue with God. So you don't argue with an absolute monarch. The period lasting roughly from 1600 to 1800 is often referred to as the Age of Absolutism. Monarchs during this time exercised complete authority and did not share power with a consul or cabinet. Absolutism was tied to the concept of the divine right of kings, the idea that monarchs had been appointed by God and were responsible only to God. Thus, no one could question their judgment. Historians often identify James the First of England as one of the first absolute monarch rulers. Not only did James I believe that monarchs should hold total power, a belief that led him to clash with Parliament on several occasions, but he also wrote extensively about the divine right of kings. In his work, The True Law of Free Monarchies, he stated, "Kings are called gods because they sit upon God his throne in the earth and have account of their administration to give upon him." So he saw himself and other monarchs as gods on earth. Since the Middle Ages, France and other European countries were structured on a system called feudalism. Part of this system was a method of land ownership and organization known as seigneurialism or manorialism. Most, but not all, of the nobility in France owned land. The term seigneur referred to the nobles who did own land. Seigneurs used peasant labor to work their lands. In 18th century France, the nobility owned about a fourth or 25% of the land, yet paid little in taxes. Under the manorial system, the seigneurial system, the nobles could tax the peasants who lived on their land. Taxation of the peasantry ended up providing the manorials or seigneurs with a major source of revenue. So your land's like your own little kingdom. You get to tax the people living on your land. France before the Revolution is often referred to as the ancient regime. During this period of more than 130 years, spanning both the 17th and 18th centuries, the country had just two rulers. The first, King Louis XIV, had a powerful impact on France during his long reign of 1643 to 1715 and is considered by many as the epitome of an absolute ruler. He centralized power in himself at the expense of the nobility, removing them from positions as governors and ministers and relegating them to the role of courtiers at the royal palace of Versailles. Louis implemented policies that led France to emerge as the dominant power in continental Europe. He increased the nation's standing army and fought 4 wars between 1667 and 1713. These wars added to France's international standing and prestige, but left the country deeply in debt. Louis increased this debt by undertaking both public construction, such as new networks of roads and canals, and royal building projects, including the Grand Palace of Versailles. He also spent huge sums maintaining a lavish lifestyle for the royal court at Versailles. He attempted to offset France's mounting deficits by increasing taxes on the peasants. But by this time, but by the time of his death, the country still remained heavily in debt. Louis XV ruled from 1715 to 1774 and proved to be incapable of dealing with France's financial problems and increased the debt by involving France in the 7 Years' War, or the French Indian War. The war pitted the British and Prussians on one side against the French, Austrians, and Russians on the other. Fighting took place not just in Europe, but also in India and in North America, where the war was known as the French and Indian War because France allied with the Native Americans against the British and American colonists. Though the war ended up as a stalemate in Europe, France suffered defeats to the British in North America and in India. As a result, it was forced to cede some of its colonial possessions. Much of the burden of paying for the war fell upon the peasantry. Well, this is the war where the Detroit gets turned over to the English. The three estates, very important. The French society, the people were divided into three categories called estates. States are the categories of people. There's three. Each estate had specific roles and privileges. The first estate consisted of the church. The second estate was the nobility, the aristocracy. And the third estate included all the rest of French society, the peasants and the common people. The third estate, the poorest group, provided most of the nation's taxes. Tax dollars were used to pay for wars, to pay for the king's palaces, to support the wealthy lifestyle of the aristocracy, and to pay for their public projects. France's nominal attempt at the parliament was called the Estates General, which was established in 1602. Though it had once served a key role, by the 17th century its importance had declined greatly. In fact, the Estates General did not even meet from 1614 until 1789. What's the message in this cartoon that the artist is trying to convey? What do you think the figures represent? Well, we see the gold bishop's hat. That must be the church. There's even a cross on the side, so you know he represents the church. And the other two gentlemen are really well dressed, so they must be the nobility and the aristocracy, because those are the rich people. And they're riding on the back of this poor fellow who's in chains and blindfolded and being whipped. Well, this guy represents the third estate, all the rest of society. So on the backs of the peasants ride the nobility and the clergy. It doesn't seem like a fair arrangement, does it? Let's talk more about this third estate that the rest of society rides on. The third estate had long labored under an obsolete tax code that placed the majority of France's tax burden upon its shoulders. When we saw in the cartoon, they were riding on its shoulders. With the heavy debt already a drain on the purse, bad weather in 1780s caused widespread crop failures that resulted in grain shortages, which pushed the price of bread, the staple of the French diet, too high for most peasants to buy. This would prove to be another factor leading to the revolution. If you can't buy food, you're going to get very upset. Let's talk about the influence of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a period of intellectual ferment that gave rise to a range of new theories about society, government, philosophy, economics, and religion. The concepts of liberty, equality, and democracy were becoming popular through the writings of thinkers such as John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Thomas Paine. Enlightenment philosophers and writers attacked the aristocracy and the monarchy, drawing much of their inspiration from the concept of social contract. The social contract was a feature of the writings of both Locke and Rousseau. It stated that a ruler rules at the behest of the people. If a ruler is unjust, according to the social contract, then the people have the right and the duty to replace that ruler. So, in other words, once the system stops being in your benefit, you should exit that system. So, if the government makes laws that hurt the people shouldn't follow the government. But as long as the government makes laws for the good of the people have a responsibility to follow them. France strongly supported the colonies against Britain, its arch enemy, during the American Revolution. French government sent troops, ships, and cash to the Americans. The French, however, could ill afford to spend money on a foreign war that would yield little in return for them. The ideals of the American Revolution and the Enlightenment principles that informed these ideals inspired men like Marquis de Lafayette to raise and lead regiments of their own troops to fight in the America. French soldiers in America ultimately got to see firsthand both the price of liberty and its benefits. The success of the colonies in winning their independence also proved that it was possible for the people to overthrow the oppressive regime of the monarchy. Here are some discussion questions for today.